Hello and welcome to episode 9 of The Thing About Golf, the podcast series from Golf Australia magazine that is on a never-ending quest to answer that simplest of all questions: what is the thing about golf? I'm Rod Murray, thanks for tuning in. If it's your first visit, welcome. We hope you enjoy, and be sure to check out the archives for some of our other in-depth interviews. They include Barnbougle Dunes owner Richard Sattler and two-time Australian Open winners, the Peters, Lonard and Senior, amongst others. There's a link in the show notes where you can find those other episodes, or head to golfaustralia.com.au and click on the podcast tab. Also, if you like the podcast and think you know somebody else who might enjoy it, don't hesitate to share. We feel like we found a bit of a niche with this, and we're keen to welcome as many like-minded golf fans as possible. If you'd like to get in touch with suggestions, comments or feedback, that's also welcomed. You can email us at golf@golfaustralia.com.au or find us on Twitter. I'm at @Rod_Murray, that's MORRI, or the show has its own handle where you can send a message. That's @ThingGolf, capital THING, capital GOLF. You'll also find the magazine on Facebook. Just search for Golf Australia Magazine, or try the links in the show notes below. Now, regular listeners will know the drill for this podcast, which is to sit down with somebody from the world of golf and try to tease out some of the many and varied reasons that people have for falling in love with the game. So far on the series, we've spoken to players and publishers and even a golf course owner. But this month, we're taking a detour to the world of golf media. One of Golf Australia magazine's most popular columnists and contributors is Scottish-born golf writer John Huggan, a man known for not pulling punches, no matter who the subject might be. John, or Huggy as he's almost universally known, is unashamedly old school, and for those of us who grew up in the world of newspapers in the 80s and 90s, he's a familiar figure. Unafraid to tackle any subject, no matter who it might bring him into conflict with, Huggy is often misunderstood as a writer who talks the game down or focuses on the negative. But that is a ludicrously unfair characterisation. Spend any time with the man and you'll understand that his love and passion for the game and what it can mean to and do for people is at least the equal of anyone in the industry. Golf has more than its fair share of cheerleaders, but John Huggan, one of the very best in the business, is not one of them. And the game is better for it. I sat down with Huggy in the press conference area of the Media Centre at the Australian Open early on the Wednesday morning of tournament week. And in hindsight, that probably wasn't the best idea for sound quality. Planes flying overhead, wind rattling the tent, and early morning vacuum cleaners were just some of the intrusions we had to deal with. But hopefully, they're not enough to take away from what was a fascinating discussion with a man that I think we could all learn a lot from. I hope you enjoy my chat with John Huggan. Well, John Huggan, I'm looking forward to this, though I'm sure you're not. Thanks for taking some time.
Anytime.
Podcast is called The Thing About Golf. What's the thing about golf for John Huggan?
Well, that's a big question. I'm not sure I've got a glib answer for that one. The thing about golf was, for me, starting out, was I came from a little village in East Lothian. There wasn't a lot else to do. My first golf course wasn't a golf course at all. It was the football pitch, which was about 50 yards from my front door. And I had an 18-hole course, which I could still describe to you, that went down the side of the pitch, across the pitch, down into the corner, away from the pitch, up to where the bonfire used to be every November 5th in the village.
Was this the first Huggan signature design?
Indeed, yes. The next hole was even better. It went over the swings, up towards the place where the football team changed. Then there was the long hole, which I look at it now and it's about a 3/4 wedge, but it was a two-shotter for me back in the day.
How old were you? What age?
I'd probably be 7, something like that. My dad was very keen. He was a decent 3-handicapper at his best, so he kind of dragged me out there. Yeah. I was a bad-tempered little git when I was young. I was too keen to be good too early and a bit temperamental, and there was clubs flying around and much tantrums, and I remember getting to the point where at Winterfield Golf Club, which is where I started to play, par 65 course on the edge of Dunbar, if you got to 12 handicap, they let you play in the senior competitions. But you had to go out and put in scores that proved you could play to 12, and man, the trouble I had getting that done, and the tantrums and the tears and the blood and the snot and all the rest of it, it wasn't pretty, but I did it eventually. So.
We'll come back to a bunch of the golf stuff in a moment. I guess outside Scotland we have this romantic notion that it's the home of golf and that every child is born into a house where golf clubs adorn the walls and the hallways and one can't help but have golf infused into the life. Is that true? Was it true for you?
It was for me because of my father, I think, but I was definitely the odd one out in the village. I mean, I wasn't. We all played football. We went up and played football at night on the pitch that I just described. There wasn't any golf really. Nobody of my direct contemporaries at the primary school, which I attended till the age of 12, were into golf.
Can you recall how the game was viewed by those who didn't play it? Was there any attitude about golf?
No, not really. I mean, it was accepted. Everybody knew that golf was a big part of the what went on, but football was the thing for kids back when I was playing, because we went up there and we played till it got dark and till after it got dark sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, people, the world's changed, unfortunately. I don't think kids would be allowed to be running around like I was at that age.
Let's not get into politics, shall we, Huggy, in the good old days and this, that, and the other, though I think everybody would empathise with what you're saying there. The world has no doubt. It's a shame,
but it's the way it is,
The world's changed in all sorts of ways. We're going to talk about some of those shortly, including in the profession that we've chosen, being writing. Back to the golf. So you talked about tantrums and temper and wanting to be good. You got to a level that I think I've heard good players describe it all the time as you were decent. You were a decent player.
Yeah, I mean, I was a good amateur. I mean, I played... I won the Scottish Boys Stroke Play Championship in 1977, and I won the match play.
How old were you? 77?
I turned 17 during that event, and then I won the match play version, the Scottish Boys Championship, in 1978. So I played for Scotland at boys level, youths level, which is under 22 or was then, and then senior level for 4 years in the early 80s.
So that is a player, looking from the outside, who has all the tools and the potential to consider a professional career, which I assume you did at the time.
It briefly crossed my mind. I was, I don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but I was too realistic. I knew exactly how good I was. And I played, one of my contemporaries, who's slightly younger than me, still is, was Colin Montgomery. I played in the same Scottish team with him, and I played a lot of golf with him as an amateur in practice rounds and things. And he was miles better than me. I mean,
in what way, Huggy? I mean, particularly for those of us who aren't particularly good, we watch pros and they all look unbelievably good. You can't pick the differences between them. In what way was he better?
Well, he was odd. I mean, he's not maybe not the best example, because he went to America, to college in America at the end of what would be 1982, I think, at which point he would be 19 years old, something like that. And at that time, he wasn't in the top dozen amateurs in Scotland. He wasn't in the Scottish team for the Home Internationals, which was a Scotland, England, Ireland and Wales event every September, round robin type thing. There was 11 players in each team. He wasn't in the team in 1982, or 83 it was. And he came back from America 9 months later, and I played a practice round with him and Philip Parkin, who'd won the amateur championship the year before. This was at Formby. The days before the amateur championship in 1984. So I played with Colin Montgomery, Philip Parkin, the holder of the championship, and Colin Dalgleish, a friend of mine who went on to be Walker Cup captain, played Walker Cup. And Colin Dalgleish and I took the other two on, which you think now...
in hindsight.
What were we thinking? So we played about 4 or 5 holes, and I turned to Colin Dalgleish, and I can remember this to this day. I said, have you spotted anything? And he went, yeah. He says, this guy's incredible. So Monty went from, in the space of 12 months, at the end of 83, he wasn't in the top dozen in Scotland. By the end of 84, he was not only the best player in Scotland, he was the best player in Great Britain and Ireland by a distance. I mean, he was incredible. I don't know what happened, because as I say, he was probably 20, 21 at that point.
So what, he just hit it further now? He hit it straighter? His short game was better? His putting was better?
Everything.
All of
everything. I mean, he was just playing a different game.
Because it's suddenly such an incremental game at that level, isn't it? The difference between shooting 63 and 73 is actually not much once you're good.
It can be. But I'm not sure he's the best example, because he's so extraordinary in so many ways. I mean, he had
such a unique sort of action. He's one of those golfers, isn't he, who does it his own way.
Yeah, and he had the same swing back then that he has now, and the same temperament. Which
you still wouldn't teach to anybody. That
no,
action.
neither one of those things. No,
exactly
he was a hell of a player. And,
Indeed.
Went on to obviously a fantastic career.
So you're immersed in that level of golf.
Yeah.
You've decided at this point, I guess, that probably a professional career is not for you. So when you've devoted that much of your life to getting that good, thinking probably all of that time, this is what I'm going to do for a living, and suddenly you realise this is not what I'm going to do for a living. What do you think? What do you do?
Well, I was at Stirling University. I did my degree is in business for reasons that still escape me.
I'm guessing you might have failed, Huggy.
Well, no, I've got letters after my name, which I've never used. But
what are they? I'd love to know.
I'm a BA.
A BA, fantastic. Well done, congratulations.
Thank you.
Tiger never finished.
Why I wasn't doing English, which was the only thing I was any good at school, I've no idea. But anyway, I did business, and in my last year at Stirling, I wrote to about 50 golf-related companies, saying sort of, here I am, do you...
So what sort of companies? So manufacturers,
right across
shops?
the board. Yeah, I mean,
anywhere.
Mostly in the media, I have to say, because I kind of fancied that. And I got a letter back from Golf World magazine in London saying, come and talk to us. We've got a job coming up. But I went down to London. I think it would be February 1986 for the interview. It was in a restaurant just at Tower Bridge in London. I remember walking out of that interview thinking, if I don't get that job, I'm in real trouble. And I duly did, but I didn't start until June because I had exams to finish. And I did my last exam at Stirling on the Thursday afternoon, and I started in London on the Monday morning at Golf World.
Talk about times changing. That is an unthinkable way for somebody to get a job these days, including just the minor detail of having an interview in a restaurant.
Well, yeah, that's right. And very nice it was too.
And no doubt they paid.
Yeah, yes,
which would have been wonderful. You said that English was the only thing you were ever good at. Was it something? Did you ever think to yourself, if not golf, then maybe writing? Because we'll come to writing and all of those sorts of things.
I mean, strangely, no. I mean, it never crossed my mind. I mean, I'm kind of naive, I think, in many ways, because when I was at Golf World in London, at the time the magazine was owned by the New York Times, the newspaper in America, and at the time they also owned Golf Digest magazine in the States. And so we had an exchange in the summer of '87 where an editor from Golf Digest came over to London for 4 months, and 2 editors from Golf World took 2 months each in Connecticut at Golf Digest. And I wasn't actually going to be one of those 2. Because I was the newest guy in, I was last in the door. But one of the guys who was going to go left for a new job the week before he was due to go to Connecticut. So the editor went, right, you're going. So I then had 2 months in Connecticut at Golf Digest, where I basically played golf for 2 months. I mean, it was fantastic. Played
on full pay.
Exactly. Played Winged Foot, all kinds of places, Pine Valley, everywhere. And never once, I can honestly say that, never once did it cross my mind, there might be a job in this for me. So I went back to London, and I think I was in Paris on an assignment for Golf World, and the phone rings, and it was Jerry Tardy, who's the editor of Golf Digest in the States, saying, there's a job here for you, do you want it? So I did, and I went.
Why do you think, Huggy, there's any number of people that could be offered that job, probably people better qualified? Why you? Why did he ask you?
I think the Scottish accent helps, definitely. I had instant credibility whether I knew what I was talking about or not.
And you could play, obviously, as well, which doesn't hurt.
I don't think that hurt. I think that, and it certainly helped me with, those 2 things helped me with the players on the tour, because in the job I had, I was instruction editor, the make you play better stuff. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Huggy, for all of your help over the years.
I do like to say that when I arrived at Golf Digest, the average handicap of the average reader was 17.8. And when I left 8 years later, it was 17.8.
Well, at least you didn't do any damage.
Indeed. And all that effort for nothing.
That's exactly right.
But where was I?
So you got the job, and you think that the Scottish accent, the playing of the golf, was
the fact I could play a bit, and the Scottish accent definitely helped. And it certainly helped on the tour, because on the American tour, I stood out.
Yeah.
They all remembered me because of my voice, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So, and to this day, I still know all the players that are now on the senior tour in America. I know just about all of them. Yeah.
And is there something in, I'm not a good player at all, I never have been. Is there an innate knowledge that you good players share that other good players recognise? So when you interview the top players, do they recognise in you an understanding of the game at a level that I don't have and can never have?
Well, I think you'd have to ask them, but I think I don't think it's a prerequisite to do the job that I did at Golf Digest, but I think it helps.
Yeah,
because they do look at you slightly differently. I remember being on the range at at Bay Hill. No, what's the place near Bay Hill in Orlando?
I don't know.
Anyway,
I live in Sydney.
Mark O'Meara lived there at the time, so I was his ghostwriter at Golf Digest, and so he was hitting balls, and his pal John Cook appeared, who also a tour player, and started giving me grief about how none of you guys can play. You're hopeless. You're this. You're that. And back then I could actually still play at that point. So O'Meara knew that. O'Meara says, "Well, John, go ahead. Here's my 1 iron. Hit a shot." Just see it. Show John Cook what. So I did, and I absolutely hit a really good one. And Cook I can remember his face. He looked at me differently from that day
Fantastic.
on.
Wow.
So it does help. But I don't think it's a prerequisite.
No, I don't think. But I just wonder, for those of us who've never been able to play any good, it feels like there's a secret society of players who can play a bit, that there's something that we don't. And I know that that's not true, but it feels like it's a bit of an exclusive club that we're never going to get entry to.
And I don't mean to say, I wasn't that good. I was a good amateur. I wasn't anywhere near
You're
pro
better
level.
than most by a long way.
Yeah,
you weren't in the 1%, but probably the 1.5%.
Maybe, but I was never anywhere near tour level. No. I couldn't play at tour level.
What are those levels? We know the increments are tiny, but if you hadn't been smart enough to realise you weren't good enough, how much better would you have needed to get?
Well, I think that I had it confirmed for me a few times. I played a lot of golf with the really good amateurs who then turned pro. Roger Chapman and guys like that. Gordon Brand Jr. I played a lot of golf with him. But the final confirmation, I think, was it was actually down here. I played in the Lake Macquarie Amateur.
Oh, wow. What year was that? Because that's been a fact.
1985.
Yeah.
It was a long time.
Big and important tournament.
And I was
for a
rubbish.
long time. Yeah,
hopeless. But it was, mind you, it's a heavy week playing in that tournament. There's a lot going on off the course that which we probably shouldn't talk
After
about.
After we turn the microphones off, you can tell me about that.
Yeah. But the following week, I went to Launceston in Tasmania, and I played in the Tasmanian Open as an amateur. And I've still got the medal. I was the second leading amateur in the 1985 Tasmanian Open.
Right. Who was the leading amateur?
Craig Parry was the leading
there you
amateur.
go.
Yes, but the final turning point for me was I played decently, not great, not my best, but I played all right. And one round I actually played with Payne Stewart's brother-in-law.
Oh, wow. Terry Gale?
No, Ferguson, his name is.
Oh, sorry, Ferguson. Yes, Ferguson.
Anyway, I finished. There's a guy called Ian Roberts won it. And Ian Baker Finch was second, 1 shot behind, but I was 20 shots behind the winner.
Right.
So I was about 4 or 5 shots around worse than the winner of the tournament, and that was probably about my level.
Yeah. Which when you watch golf isn't that much, 4 or 5 shots, but every day over 4 rounds,
without fail every round.
That's right, they add up pretty quick, don't they? So you find yourself in this completely new world, the world of journalism, essentially, but not doing the traditional journalism apprenticeship, the cadetship. Were you naturally ready to write at that stage? Had you done much writing? Where does the writing bit come in?
I'd always been, as I say, I was decent at English. I'd won prizes for essays and all kinds of things at school and I never really thought about it. I mean, it's just something I could do. And, it's like people who can draw, I think they just...
You're getting annoying now, Huggy.
They just
good
do
at golf and just can write.
Well, I wasn't, but I had a lot to learn when I got to Golf World about being a journalist, certainly. There's a guy who was there at the time, Robert Green, who's he's probably semi-retired now. He was the assistant editor, and he was enormously helpful to me. He's got my everlasting gratitude for all the help he gave me with that side of things. Because
people who don't realise it, we'll talk about journalism and the media and where that's going at the moment, but back then it was a fairly simple world in that you were a journo, you wrote stories and you put them in the paper, but I'm not sure that people understand it's more like a trade, like being a plumber or an electrician, being a good reporter. I think journalism oversells it. It makes it sound like something much more noble than it is. On a daily basis, producing news for people to consume is a really important job, but it's one that's fundamentally not much different to being an electrician or a carpenter, where you have to learn the steps, because if you get one step wrong, the consequences can be enormous.
Yeah, well, my father was a plumber by trade, and so maybe I learned a bit about that side of things from him, but... I mean, I look back now and I had so much to learn. I remember going to Madrid. One of my first assignments, I went to Madrid to the Spanish PGA Championship at Club de Campo. And I had 2 assignments. I had to do an instruction piece on short game with Jose Maria Olazabal, which was easy because he was fantastic.
Right. I'll just sit here and take notes.
Yeah. The harder thing was I had to write a profile on Jose Maria Canizares, whose English wasn't fantastic to start with. But I spoke to Olazabal and Pinero and all these guys, and that was the first story that I'd had to kind of craft by myself, and Robert Green was a huge help with that. He helped me with the lead in particular, which, as you well know, is the hardest part sometimes.
Absolutely.
So I was a complete novice at the writing part of it. But going to Golf Digest was the biggest break I ever got in that respect. I mean, I was now working with, not only on the instruction side, the best teachers and the best players in the world, but the editors. There was a couple in particular. A guy called Peter Andrews was the features editor at the time, and he was by far the best writer on the staff and the best editor as well. And he helped me a great deal. And over the course of 8 years there, I got better because I was mixing with the best people.
You sat at the feet of the masters in many ways, didn't you?
Well,
at the masters.
You should say that, yeah. I maybe told you this story before, but one of the great things about being at Golf Digest was mixing with people like that. And the house we stayed at in Augusta every year, it was the Jernigan House, was the family name. It was the most gaudy building. But anyway, in the evenings, there was a big table, and I used to just sit in the corner, and round that big table would be Dan Jenkins, Dave Marr, Dave Anderson, Pulitzer Prize winner Dave Anderson from the New York Times, Frank Hannigan from the USGA, Tom Callahan, Peter Andrews would be there, and they would just sit there and try and outdo each other and telling stories. I wish I'd taped it now, but it was fantastic.
Because they are legitimately royalty, those people. People
Absolutely.
read their things and don't give much thought, and they enjoy them, but they don't give much thought to the talent that's gone into it. I guess only those of us who are interested to see that.
These are the gods of our industry.
Yeah,
really.
Genuinely.
Callahan, Jenkins, Dave Anderson, the very best.
Yeah. Is it important what we do, Huggy? Writing about the game?
Well,
doing podcasts about the game?
That endlessly. I mean, is any game important?
I don't mean the game. What we do in covering the game. Is it important?
I think it is for the people that are interested. I think we've got a duty to tell them as much as we can, what's going on. There is a downside to that, and you've probably found that in your career as well. I remember my father asking me years ago, he said, what's the worst part of your job? And I said, I don't have any heroes left. I know too much. I've seen them up close, and they're just people. They're people with a great talent, but they're just people.
It's incredibly disappointing on many levels, isn't it?
It can be, yes. And I probably shouldn't go into some of that. But yeah, there are people that I've been hugely disappointed in. On the other hand, there have been others that I admire hugely, even more than I did before.
Mm-hmm. It's a funny world that those people live in. We get an interesting peek into it, don't we? Because we work for wages, or used to, in the good old days, for normal sorts of wages and have normal lives with mortgages and whatnot, and yet, not on a daily but a weekly basis, sit and talk and move in a world with people for whom that is not life. They have their own plans, multiple houses in multiple different countries. They are people, but it's a different world they live in, don't you? I wonder whether, should we judge those people differently, particularly when you think about somebody, let's use Rory as an example, who I think is one of the good guys of world golf.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Mid-20s, financially, his life was not only set, a life of opulence and luxury awaited him no matter what. Mm-hmm. Had he broken a leg and never played golf again, that was the case. I wonder what that does to a person and how it forms them as people.
I think Rory he would admit to this. I mean, he's not the same guy that I first met Rory when... I wrote a profile of him when he just won the silver medal in the Open at Carnoustie when Harrington won.
07.
Yeah, that was, and I went to Dublin. I went to Belfast to see him. Went to his golf club, sat in the lounge at his golf club, just the two of us. Hollywood, yeah. Not the greatest golf course in the world, which shows you that you don't have to be the...
No, that's right. The country club, not necessarily the best place to produce good players.
I'm sure it's a really nice club because it's a kind of working class, type of place I grew up in. I felt comfortable there.
I'm sure they gather in front of the TVs to this day every time he's playing somewhere and has the full support of 1,000 members of that club.
I have absolutely no doubt. Yeah. I mean, he came from nothing really. Yep. I mean, his father and his mother worked umpteen jobs to give him the chances that he took. But yeah, I mean, he's not the same innocent little kid that he was then. I mean, I don't see if Rory was ever that innocent, but there's still a charm about Rory. I mean, people are drawn to him. He's enormously attractive to kids, I'm sure, for autographs and things, but he's not the same guy. I mean, he couldn't be. He's lived in a world that's, no one could ever stay the same doing that. I mean, people ask me, how do I get on with Rory? And I get on fine with Rory. I like Rory enormously, and I think he still talks to me, so he must have, there must be something there. But I get on much better with his father. Uh-huh. His father's pretty much exactly the same age as me. He's from pretty much the same background. He was a low handicap golfer. He and I have got an awful lot in common, and he and I talk, 100 to the dozen. I mean, it's every time I see him. And I've now, my wife is the first ever female director of Forfar Athletic Football Club in Scotland, and she's met Jerry. We sat with the two, Jerry and his wife, in a bar. We bumped into them at the Open in 2011, and we sat and had a couple of drinks. So Jerry now knows my wife. And he's now a closet Forfar Athletic fan. He's even got the hat.
Did you just out him? Is that going to cause trouble for him?
No. He follows the results. I mean, every time I see him, the first thing he says is something like, "Oh, terrible result at Stranraer last week." So I've turned him, and I was standing talking to him at the PGA in America, at the back in the media bit after Rory's round, and we had our backs. Rory came up behind us. And Rory, he says, I know what you guys will be talking about, Forfar Athletic. And we were. So,
Dad's so boring, and his mates are just as bad. Some of them happen to work in the golf press.
Yeah.
Is it important, desirable, or not desirable that players maybe do like you in the job?
I've never worried.
I know you don't care. But
no, I've never worried too much about that because in our business, I mean, I think there's an awful lot. I get accused of being controversial or negative or thing. And I think
talking the game down.
I don't think I'm either one of those things. But maybe I am in relation to a lot of the people who do what we do. I do think that especially the golfing establishment and probably the players as well, they get a fairly easy ride from us. I don't think we're Woodward or Bernstein, any of us, really.
No.
But, I have been known to stick it to people now and again when I think they deserve it. And I always come back to a line that Tom Callahan told me when he did a story on Larry Bird, the basketball player in America, for Time magazine. And Bird, during the research for that, asked Tom what he tries to achieve with the story. And Tom gave him the answer. He said, I try to be fair to you and true to me. And that's what I try. I kind of aspire to that. Because when that story ran, a scrap of paper arrived in the mail at Tom Callahan's house, just an odd scrap of paper. And on it was written from Larry Bird, fair to me. That was all it said. Wow. Isn't that great?
Yeah, that's quite the achievement.
Yeah.
It probably doesn't mean anything to most people, but I think about that. Yeah. I remember Lorne Rubinstein said something very similar to me on a podcast once, that if he can look in the mirror each day and be comfortable with what he's written, because the pressures to write things you might not be comfortable with are not small, are they?
Well, I think we all have to do that. I mean, we have to bite our tongues a fair bit. I think there's places you can't go, which rightfully, I mean, there's laws to protect people from stuff like that. And hopefully I've never come anywhere close to that,
This is a bit of a tangent. It kind of brings into question the whole Tiger incident of people. There were all sorts of accusations made about all sorts of people, and that our collective brethren as the golf press, covered up for Tiger. I don't think that was true, but if it was, is that wrong? These are thorny issues, aren't they? Is his personal life of any interest or business of golf writers or their readers?
Yeah, well, I don't think we're employed to really write about that stuff. I mean, before it all blew up for Tiger, which was, again, just after he won the Aussie Masters.
Another career ruined by Australia.
Yes. And Kingston Heath, I think?
Kingston Heath, yes. Some amazing golf he played that week.
I remember at that time, I'd heard rumours about some girlfriend, somewhere, but that was all I knew at that point.
And in fairness to us, you hear rumours almost daily about every other player and a girlfriend somewhere or a baby somewhere or something they've done or a waiter they've stiffed or a bill they haven't paid.
I mean, call me cynical, but I think it would be surprising if that sort of stuff wasn't going on, given the lifestyles that these guys have. I mean, they're away from home a lot. They're in hotels. There's lots of attractive women. I'm sure,
no shortage of money.
Exactly. So there's a lot of factors involved.
Which is why our wives are glad we're underpaid, Huggy.
Well, that's true. I don't think my wife worries too much about that.
That they would either. Speaking of Tiger, you've been in the business a long time before Tiger and a long time since Tiger. And it almost feels like there's a line there. What's been his impact in your lives? Because you, of course, I know you had the great privilege of interviewing Seve once. I'll get you to talk about that. But we had Seve and we had Norman and we had Faldo and Lyle and Nicklaus and some of the big American stars. It felt like golf changed with Tiger. Did you sense that as it happened? And looking back, some thoughts on Tiger and his impact?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he was the first golfer who has ever been the most famous sportsman on the planet. And I think it'll be a long time before another golfer can say that. I mean, I think for a long time it was probably the world heavyweight boxing champion who had that, but never a golfer. I mean, Jack Nicklaus, Bobby Jones, Ben Hogan,
big in America, but
great icons in our game, but never the most famous sportsman in the world. He went way beyond that, and he played golf, I think, better than anybody's ever played golf. I mean, his best golf was the best golf we've ever seen.
Quite staggering.
Better than Nicklaus's best.
Quite staggering, isn't it? When you and to go back and watch, I feel like we forget his brilliance was so brilliant that we forget how unbelievable it was.
Yeah. I mean, the one I feel sorry for is Ernie. Anything else? I mean, he was the second best player at the time. He was, and they were really the only one that stepped up consistently. Phil Mickelson didn't.
No,
I mean, he
never has.
He kind of just disappeared into the background until Tiger went into a little bit of a dip, and Phil obviously thought to himself, "Oh, he's beatable again." But when Tiger was at his best, only one guy took him on in any way, and that was Ernie.
It gave him a couple of very good fights. There was that tournament at Kapalua that they went ahead to the President's Cup where he held a putt in the dark, if I recall, Ernie to square, and the thing ended up tying.
I think Ernie gets a bit underrated almost.
Without doubt.
Ernie was fantastic. And
Ernie still is fantastic. He's here this week, funnily enough. He is still fantastic.
I went out yesterday and watched him for half an hour on the range, just because I like to watch him.
Yeah, it's a cathartic thing, isn't it? You can watch it, you feel better about the world, and everything. The pace of everything improves when you watch Ernie.
And I like Ernie enormously, and he's always been nice to me. He gives me time, and as you know, in our business, you can forgive a man a lot if he gives you half an hour.
If you can bypass a manager and talk to a player, that player goes up in estimation.
Let's not go in there.
Well, no, let's go there. Let's talk about that. So that side of the business, one of the things I think that happened with Tiger, all the money that came into golf brought with it the middlemen. Historically, humans have loved the notion of a middleman, the person who actually does nothing, but find a solution to a problem that doesn't exist and then sell the problem to people so that they can sell them the solution. Talk a little bit about the changes in that way. There was a time, I imagine, when you started, and I know Mike Clayton talks about this, where if you wanted to talk to a player as a journo, you walked onto the range, you walked up and then said, "G'day, how you going? Got a minute for a chat? Or if not now, when?"
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore.
Well, I still do that a lot.
You do?
Yeah.
You're royalty.
Well, no. But every chance I get, I do that. Maybe it's the best way to put it. And any time that you have to go through the agent, unless you know the agent particularly well, there's a potential for disaster. I mean, a lot of times I've caught the agent out, not personally, but I've gone to the agent with a proposal for doing something with a player, and he's gone, no, that's never going to happen. And I've bumped into the player subsequently and said, "Oh, sorry, you couldn't do that," and the player knows nothing about it. And would have done it.
Yeah, happily.
Would have been happy to do it.
Would have enjoyed it, perhaps.
That's the great frustration with agents. They're there to protect, or they think to protect, in inverted commas, their employees or their charges or their employer.
Well, let's be honest,
really.
their meal ticket.
Yeah,
that's the truth of that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. But they get in the way. It's as simple as that.
That's kind of their job, isn't it? At a certain level, that's kind of necessary, isn't it? Adam Scott, Tiger Woods, Rory, they literally could not run without some sort of middleman to
absolutely.
deflect.
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, there comes a point where if you've done it as long as I have, the players that I've known a long time, they know that I'm not going to be hanging around bothering them just for the sake of standing on the range chatting. I don't do that. I mean, I go up and, as you say, I say, "How you doing? Got time whenever to do whatever I need to," and they go, "Fine, yeah or nay," and off I go. That there's no hero worship in me. No. I mean, I'm just doing the job.
Yeah. Even beyond that, Huggy, that comes back to, I think, part of that, the electrician, the plumber thing. That's part of the trade, isn't it? Understanding your role isn't to stand around. You don't go out of your way, but people say to me, "Oh, you must know a lot of the players and get to them," but I don't. It's not my job to be friends with players.
Yeah, I know them, but I don't know them.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to be friends with them. I don't want to be friends with them. Yeah. There's a couple of players I've got to know who I really like personally.
Yeah.
Not huge superstars, but people. And a lot of people get into this business wanting to be a part of the thing. Absolutely. It's not our job, is it?
If you set out to be their friend, in inverted commas, you're never going to be their friend.
No.
I mean, I have players, who are my friends, but that just has happened.
Has happened naturally.
I mean, I've caddied in tournaments for Greg Turner and Peter O'Malley and Katrina Matthew. Just because they're pals of mine, and it's mind you, they all turn into monsters when they're on the golf course.
Don't ever be a caddy, kids.
No, but yeah, that's it should just evolve. If you set out to be their friend, you're never going to be their friend, believe me.
Yeah, indeed. Quickly, I want to get a list from you. Who are the good guys? I won't ask you about the bad guys. Who have been the good guys over the years? Then we might move away from professional golf, because it's not really golf, is it?
Well, I'm biased. I mean, when I started out at Golf World and I was on the European Tour a fair bit, I became friendly with Greg Turner through Dennis Pugh, who coaches...
And he's a fantastic podcast guest, by the way.
Absolutely.
Both yours and ours.
Dennis is a great friend of mine, and I met Greg through him. He was coaching Greg at the time, Greg Turner. And then I met Peter O'Malley. And I was kind of drawn towards the Antipodeans. I mean, they seem to have the same kind of temperament as the Scots. And
blunt,
had a lot in
forward.
common.
You're never in doubt what they think.
I had a lot of dinners on the European Tour with Greg and Thomas Gugler, the German lad who played the tour at the time. He and we were the only three that we could really find that had politics that were left of centre on the tour.
Oh, well, yes.
We found that we had nobody else to talk to. So
where was Clayton?
Well, I didn't know him then. I didn't meet Mike.
He was probably sitting in a corner somewhere wondering if there were any other leftists anywhere on the tour.
No, I didn't meet Mike Clayton until 2002 at the New Zealand Open, the one that Tiger played in. That was the first time I ever met Mike.
When the New Zealand Open really started.
It was
apparently.
That was an incredible week.
Yeah, Turner was far from happy with events that week, wasn't he?
Well, I was staying with him, and it was hilarious. I mean, I laughed and laughed. On the Pro-Am day, it was a shotgun start, so he was teeing off somewhere out in the course somewhere. So he was jogging out to whatever tee it was, and was rugby tackled from behind by a security guard.
Jesus!
The security was nonsensical because of Tiger. In fact, there was players... When Tiger appeared in his car to go in the entrance, there was players locked out. They couldn't go in the entrance. So I remember standing in the queue to go in through the public entrance beside Roger Chapman from England, who was a player in the tournament and was having to queue up to get in because Tiger had just arrived.
That's madness, and of course Tiger gets the blame for that, but that's got nothing to do with him, has it?
No, not a thing. The funniest part of that thing was that there was a buggy with guard security men.
What were they worried about? New Zealand's the most peaceful country on earth.
And there was rifles sticking out the back of this golf bag on the back. There was, with head covers on them and things. It was absolutely hilarious.
That was sort of the peak Tiger Mania, was it?
Yeah.
Of Tiger Mania 1.
Yeah.
And Tiger Mania 2 as well. I was going to ask you something, then I completely forgot. We'll come back to that. Let's move away from professional golf, because it really is a tiny part of golf, isn't it? It dominates the media, but it really is a small part of golf, isn't it?
Well, tiny. I mean, and if professional golf disappeared tomorrow, I'm not sure it would make that much difference to your golf club or my golf club.
Yeah, I completely agree. So in that sense, what's the more important thing for us to cover? I feel like the media's changed in a lot of ways, and one of the ways is we talk a lot more about golf that isn't professional golf now because we've got the space to do it. We didn't used to do that in magazines in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, but now with podcasts and blogs and those sorts of things, we talk about all sorts of things to do with golf. Broadly, what's your take, or what's the state of golf now, right now in 2019?
Well, golf expanded a lot. I mean, in popularity because of Tiger, I think we went from 2 out of 10, say, to 8 out of 10. And I think we're gradually drifting back to 2 out of 10 in the wake of Tiger. I'm not sure
that right? Is that where golf belongs?
Well, that's my point. I'm not sure that that's such a bad thing. I mean, maybe that's just what golf is. It's a niche sport. It's never going to be a game for everybody, A, because it's difficult, and B, because this is something I'm not a big fan of, is the golf club system in itself is, by its very nature, is exclusionary more than inclusive.
Club. And the word club means exclusion, doesn't it?
And, it drives me nuts that the wasted opportunities that golf clubs have spurned over the years, but now they're kind of suffering because things have changed, and the golf club system isn't really fit for purpose anymore. There's people spending their money in different ways, and they're not joining clubs. They're playing everywhere rather than one place. And certainly in Scotland, where I live, there's a few courses have closed. Clubs have disappeared in the last couple of years. Thankfully, to my mind, and nobody ever says this, but I will, they're bad golf clubs. Bad golf courses are closing. There's too many golf courses in Scotland for a country with a population of 5.5 million. So it's going back to maybe what it should be. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong in that, but that's what it looks like to me.
We're a part of the golf business, which I feel split about because I don't feel like golf should be a business. Golf is something more than that to me, but the reality is it's also business. The problem isn't with the game, is it? It's with the business model, if there is a problem at all.
Well, my friend Tom Callahan, who we mentioned earlier, he has a line that he says he loves the game, hates the people. Now, hate's a very strong word, but,
yeah, but
I know what he means.
I do too.
Some of the people in golf drive me nuts. I mean, there's an awful lot of elitism, snobbery, you don't belong here stuff. Far too much of that.
And, of course, the danger with that, Huggy, is that's the perception for the most part of non-golfers, isn't it?
That's the image. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I was at St Andrews to interview Martin Slumbers, who's the head guy at the R&A.
He must have looked forward to that for weeks, Huggy.
Well, you'd be surprised how much common ground there is. But anyway, and that was one of the things I asked him was, is the R&A's image, or has the R&A's image been a problem for the game over the years? And they've made great strides in terms of they split the golf club from the corporate side of the business, and their staff is much younger now than it used to be. But my point to him was, well, I agree, all of that's true, but you haven't told the world enough. You need to advertise yourselves a bit more and blow your own trumpet. And they haven't done that nearly enough, but they're getting there, but they've got a long way to go.
Is part of the problem that we've got such a healthy internal golf media system that we forget to talk outside of it? You could spend your whole life, if you were a golf administrator, and speak to 1,000 reporters, and not one of them would necessarily come from an organisation outside of golf.
Yeah, that's entirely true. And
it's madness, isn't it?
We become too inward-looking. Golf's notorious for that. I mean, another thing I talked to Slumbers about was if you started golf again tomorrow, the system for running the game wouldn't be anything like it is now. I mean, it's an alphabet soup of acronyms out there. I mean, there's so many organisations all kind of getting in their own way, or each other's way, and it doesn't work. It's as simple as that.
It's a favourite theme of yours, this, if you started again. I hear you say it quite often about lots of different things.
Yeah.
So, of course, we can't start again, but is it possible to get to the nirvana of, had we started this way, it would have been better, but now we've finally got here?
Well, I think it helps to point out what that nirvana is.
Absolutely.
And because you'd be amazed how people never think of it. At least I try. This sounds a bit pompous, but I try a lot of time when I write to try and make things better in the game, which is why and conversely, I get accused of being negative, because to do that, you have to point out what's wrong, and here's how it can be better. I always try and be constructive in the criticism, but... So
it's not just a this is wrong. Huggy always gives you and this is how you could perhaps make it better.
I want it to be better. I want everything to be better, and that's really where my starting point for a lot of pieces.
Yeah. Let's talk about writing, because it's a whole other field, isn't it? People devote their entire lives to writing. You said writing was sort of natural for you. You've become an extraordinarily good writer, one that lots of people...
Well, you start. It's nice of you to say that, but I mean, I've been around people like Tom Callahan, who's one of my closest friends and the best writer I've ever known.
So what does that mean then, Huggy? What's good writing?
Well, I don't know what it is. I mean, it's like when you see somebody do anything really well, they make it look so easy. And you think, well, why can't I write like that? But he's I can't speak highly enough of him. I mean, and he's helped me hugely as well. He's great with advice. I send him things that I've written, and he,
still to this day,
absolutely. And he just now and again. I mean, he points out, well, you could have done this, and which is great, because he makes me think in a way that I haven't been doing. So
to me, I think they're the three key words, makes me think. Just on the good writers and the annoyingly good writers, I find Clayton is a beautiful writer about the game, beautiful writer. I remember once, I think I tweeted this, maybe one of the best things I think I've ever written. We've all got access to the same words. How does he put them together so much better than me?
Yeah, well,
he doesn't have any words that I don't have.
That's the X factor, isn't it? I mean, and Dan Jenkins is another one. Sadly, no longer with us. But I knew Dan really well. I mean, because I was around him a lot at Golf Digest, and I can't remember what major it was, but he was out. I bumped into him. I'd been at the loo probably, and I was coming back into the media centre, and he was standing outside having a cigarette. And he was just kind of, contemplating the meaning of life and staring into space. And I said, "Oh, hello, Dan. How are you getting on? What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm writing." And that was him just thinking about what he was going to... The preparation was the key.
Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. What he's saying? The more time you think about it, the more time you put into it, the better it's going to be, mostly.
Yeah. And do you devote a lot of time and thought to writing and improving your writing and being better at it?
I try, but it's the way my working life has gone in the last few years, and I'm sure you'll, empathise with this, is that I've just been churning stuff out more and more.
Like a sausage factory.
To survive. So the preparation and the thought, frustratingly, has not been there to the same extent. And I think I've written some absolute rubbish the last few years, probably because I just haven't had the time to put the proper amount of effort into it.
Are you at your best, do you feel, with your writing when you sit down and it just comes out quickly? Or are you one who wrestles with a piece and panel beats it until it's what you wanted at the end?
I'm pretty quick. One of my closest friends and favourites is Jaime Diaz, who's now at the Golf Channel.
Which is a tragedy for all of us who read about golf, because he no longer writes about it.
I thought he was the best at what we do that was full-time golf.
Yeah.
Because Tom Callahan, for example, is a sports
writer.
Does all
sorts of stuff, yeah.
But Jaime was wonderful. And I remember I was sitting next to him on a Sunday night at a major in America when I was, as you put, the sausage factory. It was a Sunday night. He was sitting there beside me with his laptop doing his one piece for that on that day, and he turned to me and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm halfway through the second of 4 pieces that I've got to write on the same subject for 4 different, and that was the only reason I could get to that tournament
was to do 4 different jobs.
Was to do all that, and now there is no way that any one of those 4 stories was as good as I could make it.
No.
Because I was churning it out. I was on a deadline and I had to get it done. And he looked to me as if I was mad, but I think, he had a new appreciation for the world that I was living in.
There's a luxury about that, obviously, for him, but it's the reader that ultimately misses out, isn't it?
Well, hopefully, yeah. I mean, again, my story would have been better if I'd only had to do one,
How do you find a story, Huggy? What's your sort of... Let's say I said to you, Huggy, I'll give you $1,000. I want you to go out and do me a profile on Adam Scott. And you can get access to him. You can talk to him.
Once you've got that, that's the easy part. I mean, I'm not the greatest reporter and I'm not the greatest guy at coming up with the ideas. But once I've got the
brief,
once I know where I'm headed, I know exactly what to do. But the hard part for me is dreaming up the story, really.
Yeah. And how we've talked about how the media has changed and whatnot. You've probably given us an outline there. When you first started, you worked for one place and they paid you a decent amount of money and you did your job.
I didn't know I was living when I was at Golf Digest. Well, we never worried about money back then.
That's right, but we do now, don't we?
Yeah.
Is that healthy?
Well, I suppose it is in a way. I mean, it gives you a new appreciation for the nice side of life, working life, but.
Because you could do something else, Huggy. I mean, there's a bunch of work involved in organising 4 different publications to take 4 different stories to give you the opportunity to go and be a part of the tournament. You could be a postie or a bus driver.
Well, I've always fancied being a postman.
I know you have. That's why I mentioned it.
I'd be quite happy being a postman.
I quite like the idea of it too, to be honest with you.
I've become a bit of a wheeler dealer the last few years, and I'm an expert at getting cheap flights, and I've stayed in some absolutely grotty hotels, and Uber's a wonderful thing.
Why do you do it?
Well,
is there something inside?
That thought has crossed my mind more than once. Like,
are you driven?
If I'm in a Motel 6 in St. Louis, as I was last year or the year before for the PGA, and I'm thinking, what am I doing?
How did it come to this?
Why am I doing this? Yeah, in my time of life. I mean, I'm 60 next year. I mean, this is not what I had in mind for my working life back in the day. I was spoiled back on the other side of that.
Well,
I was spoiled at Golf Digest. I mean, if we... photographer Dom Farrar, my great friend, he and I were the sort of a team on the instruction pieces. If we flew from Connecticut to Los Angeles to do a piece with somebody and the weather was bad or it was a bit cloudy, we didn't do it. We came home and we went back and did it again.
Oh.
They don't do that anymore.
They don't.
But that was the world we lived in back then.
So is there somewhere in John Huggan, is there a need that even perhaps you don't want to acknowledge that you really want to be a part of this circus? That's why you work so hard to remain a part of it?
Yeah. I mean, I love golf. I've loved golf, from the beginning, and I still love golf, even if I don't play it very much now. But it's partly because I hadn't had time, really. I mean, I got divorced about 20 years ago, and I had 2 young kids, and I basically stopped playing for about 6 years because all I did was work and look after them. That was what I did.
See, life happens, doesn't it? Away
Absolutely.
from
It gets in the way. Gets in the way.
It's what happens while you're doing other stuff.
And I've never been half the player since then that I was before that. So I blame my ex-wife really for that.
Yeah, that's right. put it on the list of things that you no doubt blame her for. And does that bother you? Would you like to still be playing?
I've said this to people many times, and I absolutely mean it. I'm being 100% honest. I found out how good I was. There's no mystery in the game for me, which is part of the reason why I don't think I play very much. And I don't play nearly as well, and I still think like a good player, but I don't play like a good player.
Do you enjoy playing, or has it become something you don't enjoy doing anymore?
I enjoy hitting shots. I still go and hit balls now and again at driving ranges and things, and I enjoy that. I enjoy the artistic side of it, which is harder to do with the equipment. You can't shape shots. I still go out and play with persimmon woods and things because that's more fun. I'm at the stage now where if I want to enjoy it, and if that's the fun for me, I never add my score up. I have no idea what I score, and it's irrelevant. I haven't had a handicap in 20 years either.
No.
So
in the grand scheme of things, it actually doesn't matter what anybody shoots, professional or other's, but it certainly doesn't matter what John Huggan shoots on a social 9 holes
absolutely not.
On an evening in Dunbar.
No.
We're sitting here in a media centre at the Australian Open. You probably hear the planes going over and they're vacuuming. It's early in the morning. You spent a lot of your life in these sorts of places. Are they a comfortable place for you? They're very utilitarian, aren't they? This is a temporary building that's been knocked. It's an impressive temporary building, but it's still a temporary building. What about that as a lifestyle?
Well, I never really think about, too much about the surroundings. It's the people that make or break it for me. I mean, I've been coming down here for a long time now, and I've got some good friends here, I think, and I enjoy being around you. I mean, it's there's something about Australians and the attitude to sport, I think, which I'm drawn to. It's similar.
It's a bit Scottish, isn't it? A bit Scottish and Irish.
It's very similar,
which is not a surprise given the stock that came here and made it up. What's the future for this game of ours, Huggy? Here in Australia and globally, your own home country has probably got...
Well, I think it's going to have to adapt. There's so much more competition now. Kids don't do what I did. They don't have They go up to the football pitch in West Barnes, the village where I'm from, and play football at night till it gets dark anymore. That doesn't happen. They're not cycling up to Winterfield Golf Course in the morning, playing with their mates for playing 72 holes in a day with their mates like I did in the summer holidays. I mean, I don't see kids doing that anymore. So
are they doing it with other sports? I think are we just part of a general move away from that outdoor activity?
I haven't researched this, but I have to believe that every sport's in the same position. I mean, there'll be fewer people playing. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, indeed. Before I let you go, I need you to tell us 2 stories, which are particularly favourites of mine that you tell. When you encountered Lee Trevino and really fell in love with the game, I think of the 1973 Ryder Cup.
Yeah.
And
well, I'd seen him before that, but yeah.
And was it Roberto Di Vincenzo and your interaction with him? So you can pick the order you tell them in, but I want to hear both.
Roberto Di Vincenzo would be first. The first Open Championship I ever went to in person was in 1970 at St Andrews. I would be 9 going on. My birthday's at the end of July, so I'd be 9 going on 10. It was early July 1970. So my father and I walked around, for a week, and I've still got my little green autograph book.
I've seen it.
Yeah,
I can confirm.
There's a lot of famous names in there. A lot of dead people, sadly, but Roberto being one. But I stopped him. I was only about half his height, maybe, if that. I stopped him for an autograph, and I can still see him looking. He looked down at me and he goes, "You know my name?" And I'm looking up and I said, Roberto. And he goes, "Ah." And he clapped my cheeks with his hands and then signed my book and walked off. And he had a fan for life. Yeah. Just the little 30 seconds, a minute that he spent with a little kid. From that day on, I loved Roberto Di Vincenzo.
That's a beautiful interaction, isn't it, to think about?
It was just a nice, natural thing to do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he did it with lots of kids. I hope he did. But as I say, you can make or break a relationship.
Change a life.
Absolutely.
Really can. Yeah. And tell us about Lee Trevino.
And Trevino, well, I'd seen Trevino at that Open. In fact, Trevino on the quiet. Trevino should have won that Open in 1970. Forget Doug Sanders.
Controversial take, yeah.
Doug Sanders was playing with Lee Trevino in the last round, and Trevino finished, I think, 2 behind Nicklaus and Sanders in that Open, and 3-putted 5 times in the last round.
Oh, ouch.
That's what people forget.
Yeah, absolutely.
He should have won, and he won.
We forget something about every tournament, don't we?
That's true, yeah.
Every tournament has somebody who's been forgotten.
I was watching on TV this morning the Spieth winning the Open at Birkdale. And there was things,
I forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's only 3 years ago.
Sounds like we're about to be evacuated.
Yeah.
You mentioned Jordan Spieth.
Indeed. But Trevino, that was the first time I'd seen Trevino. It was 1970. He's in my autograph book about 5 times. Kids that age were immediately drawn to him because of his, certainly on-course personality. And then he won the Open the following year. And then in 72 at Muirfield, he won again, famously chipping in at the 17th green in the last round. And I was there. I saw that. I was actually there in
Tony
person.
Jacqueline's heart.
And I saw Doug Sanders miss the putt as well, by the way.
You're a real good omen.
I know.
The players must love seeing you turn up to watch them.
Exactly. But anyway, the following year, 1973, the Ryder Cup was at Muirfield, which is only about 50 minutes from my home. So my dad and I went over. It was a practice day. The American team had flown into Prestwick on the other side of Scotland, which is what they did then. And then they were,
no common sense involved.
Then they were driven, to Muirfield, and most of them quite sensibly went to their beds in the Grey Walls Hotel at the back of the 10th tee. But 2 guys didn't. It was J.C. Sneed and Trevino, and it was a kind of grey, drizzly, not particularly a great day, but there must have been about 30 people watching, and my dad and I were 2 of them. And Trevino just put on a clinic. I mean, it stuck with me, 46 years ago now, and I can still remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, he was fantastic. He just hit all these shots, and what sticks in particularly in my mind was that there was a little wooden stick sticking. It had been stuck in the ground, and it was sticking up. It was about 100 yards from where we were. It was maybe 2 feet high, and he goes, "Right, folks, watch this." So he gets his wedge out, and he opens the face up, and he carves it miles up in the air, and it comes down, poof, never moved about 2 feet from the stick. And then with the same club, he pulls back another ball forward and knifes it deliberately along the ground, 2 feet from the stick. I mean, that's genius, and I don't see too many people that can do that these days. No.
And is that where you got the inspiration for the sickening knee-high fizzer that you mastered later in life?
I spent my my playing life trying to get the club open at the top, and I failed. And that's why I'm a bad wedge player. So.
John Huggan, it's been an absolute treat. I luckily will get to spend the next 4 days in your company, and again next week at the President's Cup, but I hope our listeners have enjoyed it. And I can confirm, people, Huggy is not a curmudgeon. He's a lovely...
I think I am.
He's as soft and gentle as a lamb on the inside. Yeah. Thank you, Huggy.
My pleasure, anytime.
Now, you'd think that was the end of the interview, and normally you'd be right. But as it turns out, Huggy is not only a vastly better golf rider than me, but also has a nous for podcast interviews, which I clearly lack. As we stood up at the end of our chat, he casually mentioned that I hadn't asked him about the great Seve Ballesteros. This was an oversight on my part, for which I'll be eternally ashamed, and the only way to correct the error was to press the record button again and capture this. So the second time I've ever done this, Huggy, I've turned the tape recorder back on because you mentioned the magic word, which I forgot to bring up. I'm always trying to be conscious of time. Seve. I'm just going to say Seve, and I'm going to let you go. Talk about Seve.
Well, I was lucky enough. I spent a fair bit of time around Seve, especially when I went to Golf Digest. He'd been signed up. In fact, 2 weeks after I went to America, it was April 1988. I was back in an airplane flying to Spain, to Pedreña, to do 4 or 5 days of instruction stuff.
Wow. Make you nervous, wouldn't it?
Fantastic. I mean, he was the best player in the world at the time. He won the Open later that year at Lytham, famously. But anyway, we did all the instruction stuff, and he was great, and he was friendly, and he was, he gave us as much time as we needed and all the rest of it. But we finished, and the following morning we were going to play Pedreña.
You and Seve?
And Steve Surley, who was the photographer. So the 3 of us were going to play. And we were going because our flight was in the afternoon. We were going to drive off after lunch, whatever. So that arrangement is made. We turn up the next morning, and it's blowing an absolute gale. I mean, you could still play, but and Seve goes, "Well, I'm not going to play in that," and I don't blame him for a second. So anyway, Steve and I went out and we play all the way around. I'm not sure what hole it is. It's about the 15th or the 16th, par 3, and there's a big bank round the green which offered a lot of shelter. So we get up on the tee, we look up, and who's chipping and putting around the green but Seve, and he sees us and he steps back and waves us up, and I can still remember standing over the ball thinking, "Oh my God, please God, let me hit the green," because the last thing I wanted was Seve watching me chip. Can you imagine?
Yeah, very much.
So thank goodness I did hit the green, but so Seve was great. I mean, and he read a surprising amount, because a couple of columns I wrote lamenting the scientific drift of the game away from the art, which he epitomised, obviously. And I made the point that the equipment mitigated against people of his talent level, especially the lofted wedges. Because Seve only used a 56-degree wedge.
That's extraordinary, isn't it, to think about?
And he could hit all those shots that he could hit, and nobody else could. But then the 60-degree and all the rest of it came in, and suddenly that took away his edge to a great extent. And I wrote a column basically saying all that. And I remember he came looking for me in a press centre once to thank me for and saying, you're right.
What was he like, Seve? You hear all sorts of different stories about him.
He was a rogue. I mean, hugely charismatic. I mean, maybe the most, apart from Tiger, would maybe be the most charismatic player I've ever come across.
Completely different characters, he and Tiger, weren't they?
Well,
or were they? Well, in some ways,
lifestyle,
obviously.
I mean, I don't think Seve quite had Tiger's lifestyle, but there were similarities in certain areas. And maybe I can tell this now because Seve's not around anymore, but I was at a tournament once and I was in a restaurant sitting there, and I looked up and there was Seve coming in with a lady, not his wife, and he spots me and he comes across and he said, "I'm not here." Fair enough, Seve, but I got a good interview out of that because he owed me.
Tit for tat.
But, yeah.
Mike Clayton says that the players in Europe in Seve's era adored him. I thought that was a really interesting word. They adored him. I don't think they would say that about Tiger, would they?
No, there was a love for Seve that, the other members of that era, the Valdo, Lyle was enormously popular, but nothing like Seve. People say, how do you compare Seve and Nick Faldo? You can debate as much as you want who was the better player, but there is no debate over who was the most historically significant, and that's Seve. I mean, Seve was, they say that he was the world's Arnold Palmer, outside America, and it's one of the great shames, I think, is that America didn't get Seve. They used up the
Did he get America as well? I don't think
there was faults on both sides, undoubtedly. But the American press I always thought were lazy. It was all the matador and this and that, and they never took the time to get to know him and make him comfortable there. And he could have been huge for that.
What he could have done for them.
Dean Beeman missed the point completely with Seve,
which he didn't miss much, did he? Beeman actually, in hindsight,
but all the things that Seve fought for back then are now routine. I mean, he was right on almost everything, but Beeman fought him and shouldn't have, because Seve would have been a better player and would have made a lot more money, which was important to Seve, and the tour would have been enhanced enormously.
I never saw Seve play in person, obviously, but you would have known him. You watch the footage and you see that there's a childlike joy in what he's doing. There's a showing off element of, look what I can do, and none of you others can do it.
That's a great point, because as I say, I wrote a lot of his instruction stuff for a while, and one time,
what an insight that must have been.
We were in Florida and we were doing the short game thing, and he was just kind of warming up while the photographer was mucking around with these cameras and things. And it was only here to this door, which is maybe 20 yards.
Yeah, if that.
And he was hitting little chip shots like that, and he would hit it. It would skip once, land, and then screw back about 6 inches on a shot that length. Yeah. And I was kind of, oh man, how did you do that? And he just smiled and looked at me, and then he did it again. He could, just to prove it. It was easy for him. I mean, he had hands like no one ever had hands.
I've often thought, you might agree with this or you might not, Tiger at his best, at his most charismatic, are in those moments when you see him playing and he takes the same childlike joy in a shot that he's hit. And we never get that Tiger away from the course, maybe a little bit more lately, but to me that was always the appeal of Tiger, is that you knew that those huge uppercut fist pumps, some people found them offensive, but there was an exuberance there that he had no control over.
All those guys have that. And maybe I'm being a wee bit unfair to when I say America didn't get Seve. The public and the press didn't get Seve, but the players did.
Yeah.
You get Phil Mickelson, sit him down and just say Seve, and he'll talk for an hour. He loves Seve, and so did Tiger. I can still remember being at the Masters, whatever year it was back in the day, early for Tiger, and he played He played 9 holes, first 9 holes at Augusta National with Seve and Jose Maria Olazabal. And they were having contests, chipping contests. They would put a tee in the ground and go to the worst possible spot and see who could get it closest and all that kind of thing. And you could see Tiger watching it. And Tiger went off after 9 holes. He disappeared. And I heard later, he admitted later that he went off to practice what he'd seen them doing. Yeah. They were better at that than he was. But he was smart enough to watch them and learn.
I don't know how true it is. I remember hearing a story about Tiger. I heard that it was he and Phil, but it may have been him and somebody else. But he challenged his other player to $1,000 a hole short game clinic, and he lost $8,000. And as he handed over, he says, "It's the best $8,000 I've ever spent because I've always wondered how you did that."
Yeah.
And the whole point was to be able to see it up close.
But Phil, no American player, I think, adored Seve like Phil does.
What is that electricity? Some players have. There's a young guy down here that plays, and I've written this many times. It's just my opinion. There's something electric about him, Min-Woo Lee. When he stands over the ball, you have a sense of anticipation. What's going to happen here? Yeah. Some players have that, some don't. In fact, to be the best professional you could, that's the last thing you want. What you want people to think when you stand over the ball is, this is going exactly where he looks.
But then he's going to hit home runs in his career, and that's going to be what people remember. I remember thinking Seve was guilty of this, and so was Sandy Lyle, who were the two best. They would win 5 or 6 times a year at their peak.
Didn't Seve say Sandy was the best?
Well, Sandy was incredible for a very short period of time, and by far the best player. But the thing was that they both made the mistake and publicly said, "Well, I'm trying to be more consistent." I think consistent is the most overrated word in golf at that level. Why the hell would those guys who could win 5 or 6 times a year and miss every other cut, why would they want to be 7th every year?
That's right.
Nobody's going to remember that.
It's funny, Tiger pointed to this earlier this year. People were asking about how the game's changed, because he's been away for a couple of years and the game certainly has changed those at the top. And he said the difference is that guys aren't trying to peak for certain weeks. They just go 100% all the time. And sometimes that means you have a good putting week and you win, and other weeks it means you miss the cut.
Yeah, they take on
but they
shots
don't care.
that maybe back in the day they wouldn't have, because the money wasn't there, and coming 6th or 7th meant you got a nice check, and that was really what people were thinking about. They weren't thinking about winning. And there's still a lot of guys out there that their comfort level is such that they're quite happy to plod along and win $1.8 million in a year and never finish higher than 6th and never put themselves under any real pressure.
You can be a mediocre for that level PGA Tour player for 10 years and have an extraordinarily comfortable
I don't know
life.
About you, but every year I look at the
money list
and think, where did he win $2.9 million?
$2.9 million, that's right.
You barely heard of the guy.
Exactly. So I wonder, I know Rory has said this, it's an interesting look into the human psyche. Essentially, he doesn't want what Tiger's got. He'd love to have the resume, but he does not want the life that comes with it.
I don't envy Tiger's lifestyle either. I mean,
or Rory's for that
Tiger
matter in many ways.
I feel like at its peak, and it wasn't pretty. I mean, he had no privacy, no way of getting from A to B without all kinds of hassle, and
which makes that whole other part of his life extraordinary if you think about it. That he got away with that for as long as he did, being who he is.
Exactly.
That's quite bizarre.
Yeah.
Rory once sat here in Australia. I think it might have been 2014, 15. Might have even been here at this particular golf club. And at the time, he was going through that bust up with his management. There was that whole thing about his iPhone and backups in the cloud and all this sort of stuff. And something came up about it in the press conference, and he pulled out his phone, sat up here at this podium, and pulled out his phone, and he said, "I can tell you what I'm doing every day from now until March next year." This was in November. He would have been 24, 25 at the time. I can't live like that.
No one would want that.
No. I'm sure built into that was Rory time. 2 hours here is Rory time. You can do what you want, Rory, but then you're expected here for a dinner and there for a business meeting.
And Rory can go and do things that Tiger couldn't. I mean, we talked about it earlier. I mean, the level of fame was extraordinary for Tiger. And I don't think we'll ever see another golfer on that level.
Interestingly, possibly never another athlete. I listened to a really interesting pod. Do you know Richard Gillis? You'd know Richard.
I know who he is.
Yeah, he writes some fantastic stuff. He started a podcast called The Unofficial Partner, plug for Richard's podcast. And they did an episode about Tiger and Nike and that whole thing. And one of the panel participants, I can't remember who it was, said, we're unlikely that Tiger and Serena Williams are probably the last 2 genuine global superstars, not because anything else has changed apart from the media. You no longer have the giant cannons of media that drove those two. Yeah. It's now so fragmented that it's likely impossible to get to that level of exposure, which is a really interesting sort of take on how the world's changed. So
I'm not sure I agree completely, because they were on such a level. And I think when you get to that, you go way up there. I'm not sure it matters what the media is like.
Possibly. Is it just performance?
No, it's not. I mean, there was something about Tiger. I mean, he had a great name, didn't he? And
that helps.
Shirt, and again, enormously, attractive to children. The kids
Young
are drawn
people.
to him. Yeah, and Seve had a bit of that, but nobody's ever had it like Tiger.
Rory does it. Jordan has a little bit.
Yeah, they do.
Jason has it. Yeah, and Adam doesn't.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think Adam Scott's fantastic for the game, and yet
Adam Scott's one of the nicest human beings you'd ever want to come
and people
across.
will tell you he's boring.
Yeah, well, nice is boring.
Yeah, but at least he's authentic.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's not pretending.
No question.
Huggy, we're going to continue this conversation, but not for the listeners, just for us. Been great to have you, mate. Thanks very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
Well, there you have it, a peek into the mind of one of the best golf writers in the business, and what was for me, as you'd expect given my chosen career path, an enormous privilege. You can find John's writings in many places, including each month in Golf Australia magazine, which if you don't yet subscribe to, you really should. Now make sure to come back next time for what will be a first even for us, a chat with a major winner who doesn't play golf. Yes, episode 10 is a sit-down with tennis great Liz Smiley, or as she's now known, mum to reigning Australian junior champion Elvis. That's next time here on The Thing About Golf.